all things New Orleans Saints. This is Who Dat Discussion.
Who dat? Who dat? Who dat? Who dat? Who dat? Say they gon' be them same.
Powered by Overtime Media.
The Saints select defensive end Payton Turner. Welcome in to another draft episode here at the Who Dat Discussion. As always, I'm your host, Andrew Galata. You could follow me on Twitter at Andrew Galata, and then also you could follow the podcast on Twitter at the Who Dat Dis. And the first round pick for the Saints, it's in, and it's defensive end Payton Turner from Houston, and this is a very interesting one, to say the least. The Saints get a defensive end with JOK, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, still on the board. He ended up falling now into the second round. He was not drafted here on day one, but this pick, I mean, it's surprising. No one had this on their radar. To me, Turner was more of a second round pick. I think he's a solid prospect, and I like that's why I don't want to knock the pick completely. I think he's actually a really solid prospect. He's very athletic, kind of reminds you a little bit of Marcus Davenport. It's just the way that he's extremely athletic, very high raw athletic score. He's got kind of a lot of great intangibles. Just hasn't put them all together quite yet, but he was a really fast riser. His draft projection was in round 2. His NFL comparison by NFL.com was Preston Smith. Look, he's a 10-sack guy. I mean, that's definitely a great comparison for him, but he was definitely more of a round 2 prospect, and I don't know if he would have fell all the way to 60, but I think he would have probably went in probably the 40s, maybe 40s or 50s, which, I mean, I guess them for the Saints, you could kind of if they really wanted him, they couldn't really get him in the second, but he's this is a pick you got to hit on because he's a second round prospect right now. That's not to mean second round prospects, don't work out. Look at the Saints. They've been great with second-round prospects, but that's just what I really kind of think he is. He does have flaws, which with the other prospects that were available, like JOK was available. You had Christian Barmore, if you want to go defensive line, still available. You also had Rondale Moore still available. You had Elijah Moore still available. So, you had a lot of guys still there. And, a lot of guys with, to me, maybe less flaws. Now, the upside, look, if you can get a 10-sack guy in defensive end, on a rookie contract, that's obviously worth more than, some of these other positions. But, I mean, when you have more complete players on the board, and this team needs complete talent right now, especially with all the holes, it's definitely, I'm not going to call it a completely questionable pick, but it's questionable, I mean, a little bit. And, this is going to put a lot of pressure on Turner to succeed here. And I get the pick because I think a lot of people are really high on Carl Granderson, and he's still an undrafted free agent. To me, that's more of a question mark. Marcus Davenport's a question mark. You don't know what you're getting out of him. And Cameron Jordan's now getting older, and you saw him age and decline a bit last year. Was that just a one-year thing? Or is this kind of going to be a trend where Jordan does, kind of get worse and worse throughout the end of his career? It's going to be interesting to see what happens. And there are a lot of holes up there. And then besides Onyemata, you don't have a lot of, the interior. So, it does make sense. And I think a lot of people thought that the Saints would have went cornerback. I thought the Saints were going cornerback or linebacker. But I knew that the line was a little shoddy. And I wasn't really comfortable going into this season, with this line, right now. But I thought they'd pick a second round or third round guy. We saw them in one of my mock drafts. I picked Milton Williams, who's a defensive lineman. So I thought they would definitely address it. But the first round, they must really see something in Turner, who NFL.com's prospect grade 6.31. That's pretty high. It says he'll be a starter within the first 2 seasons, which obviously the Saints hope that's true. And if you get that high of a pick, he's a starter. You're hoping from day one or close to that. And we're going to see how that all works out. He should definitely at least be in the rotation. And now with the Saints, you're stacked at defensive end, and you're stacked with a lot of first, second round talent. Everybody in that room's first or second round talent. They got to succeed. They got to be a top 5 group. And I know that's a high bar, but you have Cameron Jordan, who's all pro first round pick, 10-sack, 15-sack guy, whatever you want to call that. Davenport's your 2 first. He's got to come through. You have now Turner, who's a first round pick. Tamo Passanio, he was a second round pick for the Chiefs. And then also you have Carl Granderson, who obviously is an undrafted free agent, but you have a lot of talent there. You have 4 top 2 round picks, 3 first round picks on that line. It has to come through. And then interior is a little, you have a little less star-studded, but I really mean the edges. The edges have to dominate. And if you can dominate on the edges, that'll help your back end a lot. And so I do understand the pick from that end. I mean, it's just, in a very weak defensive end class, was Payton Turner the guy? Is really interesting. He was ranked number 42 in Daniel Jeremiah's top, 100 prospects. That's what I'm saying. Like, I think he would have probably went 40. He wouldn't have, I think, got to 60. So maybe the Saints just felt like instead of moving up, let's pick him here. He's kind of the best guy on our board right now. He's our best available. I think that's the most interesting thing. I mean, one of his biggest strengths here on NFL.com is that he has plenty of upside left for continued development. Obviously, Ryan Nielsen, who's just a great defensive line coach, maybe that's something they saw in him. He fits that 4-3, system perfectly, which is great. He has perfect, Saints size, Saints athleticism, 6'5", 270. He fits right in there with him. Very athletic person. Kind of reminds me a lot of Davenport in these ways. Just like he has everything. He just has to put it all together. And those guys could be the most frustrating, and we're going to see what happens with Turner. But you just see it. He has the explosion, which is great to see. He's got great strides. That's great to see. He's got good reaction time, got good athleticism. You just see all the athletic things. He's got the agility. He's been learning how to stop the run really well, and he's a guy that could set the edge, in my opinion, once he learns the technique, I think, a little better. He's got loose hips. Like every single, athletic thing he's got down. And the one thing that Nick Underhill said, he's like, every, first-round pick for the Saints always has a high raw athletic score, RAS, always over 9. And that continues with Payton Turner, who has an over 9 score there. So that's just kind of, to me, what this pick was. You're going to get a guy, to me, kind of reminds me of Davenport a little bit. And you're hoping this one works out more, and you're hoping Turner doesn't get hurt and all that stuff. It's going to be kind of interesting how that all works out. According to an AFC scouting director, said, I wanted to keep him a secret after I saw him last year, but that didn't happen. He's going to become a force. So that's obviously a good thing for the Saints. I do think he's a guy that he's not a question mark, because I think he's going to come up in here and, produce. He just kind of reminds me a lot of Marcus Davenport. And look, I didn't watch any tape on him. I'm not going to say I've been watching Payton Turner all the time, but he just seems like a guy that, just looking at his measurables, looking at his statistics, looking at, multiple, not just NFL.com, but multiple, kind of draft scouting, reports, that just sees the type of player he is. And there was a report that came out earlier today that Payton Turner was seen as a high riser and he's going to go in the first round. And it ended up the Saints were that team. And to me, that is really interesting to see how that all works out. You have the athletic, all that athletic stuff is there. And when you have someone with all the athletic stuff, the Saints probably feel like they can put it together with Ryan Nielsen. And, you have another player with Marcus Davenport, very similar. You have another player with Temo Passigno, who's very similar. You could probably put Carl Granderson in that same place. You have so many athletic guys that have, just a ton of potential. Who's going to come through? And I'm going to put high expectations on this group because now you have the talent, you have the draft capital there, you have the athleticism. It's got to be a top 5 group, and that'll help, definitely shield your other worries at cornerback and linebacker, which you're going to have to, really address tomorrow. I think cornerbacks are number 1. They're probably going to have to move up. Asante Samuel, I think him or, maybe another guy has to be on this team. And, I do think Samuel in the second round will be a really solid pick. You put Richard Sherman with him, I think you can really grow that tandem really well. But that's just kind of, what I'm thinking there. After the Saints, just going to a little, pre and post, who was on the board, who just came right off the board for the Saints. So who just came off the board in the last few picks, it was Travis Etienne for the Jaguars, who was picked at 25. Then you had Greg Newsome at 26. That was the player I was holding out for. To me, I honestly feel like the Saints were probably targeting Newsome. He got picked, and then they pivoted to alignment instead of... They always do that. Some skill position player they really want gets picked a little early, and then they pivot to line. Always happened last year, and, because they wanted Kenneth Murray. Kenneth Murray gets picked one before them, and then they pivot to Ruiz. Here, you have Newsome get picked 2 before them. You pivot to the lineman in Turner, who you feel like has a lot of upside. That's just kind of how I feel like, this draft kind of turned out for the Saints. I bet they wanted to move up so they can pick a guy like, Farley or Newsome, which I really wanted them to get, but it takes 2 to tango, and that's kind of the biggest thing. And obviously, just the values weren't there. And we'll hear what, Sean Payton has to say if that comes out now or a little later. It's going to be really interesting just to see, how that all works out. And, I feel like, when looking at Turner, I do think he's a guy with a lot of intangibles. And that pick, just looking at the guys around him, I honestly do think that's what happened. You had a guy you really wanted in Newsome go off the board, and they pivoted to alignment, as they always do. And then after Turner, you had another cornerback, Eric Stokes, come off the board from Georgia, who's pretty solid in my mind. You have Gregory Rousseau, the defensive end from Miami. You have Jason Owe, the outside linebacker, edge rusher from Penn State. And then you have Joe Tryon, the outside linebacker, pass rusher from Washington. So the Saints obviously started that defensive lineman kind of, just push at the end of the first round here. That means JOK falls out of the first round. And I think that's going to be a big question mark. Whoever he goes to, wherever he ends up at, either, the 30s or the 40s, it's a steal. It's such a steal because he's such a good player, and he's going to just fill in right there and be a great player wherever he ends up. And if I'm the Saints, I'd probably try to trade up. I'd probably try to trade up to get JOK if you can get him here in the second round. And if you can't get him, then you go to Asante Samuel. I would definitely try to trade up. I think the Saints will end up trading up. Usually first round, they're very, very... It's like all the reports come out that they're going to trade up and they end up don't. But that's just kind of how, this kind of worked out for the Saints. We are going to take a quick break, very, very quick. And then when we come back, we're just going to talk about kind of a little of the weaknesses to Turner's game and just maybe how he fits in a little more with the Saints team. You are listening to the Who Dat Discussion podcast. Welcome back into the Who Dat Discussion. We're going to talk all first round draft here with the Saints as they selected Payton Turner, the defensive end from Houston. We talked about all of the strengths from him, kind of what the Saints strategy was. It looked like they pivoted, looked like they wanted Newsome. Newsome gets picked at 26th. The Saints pivot then, and 2 picks later, and pick the lineman. And the Saints always pick lines, and you can say it over and over again, and you can kind of have it like always, like, oh, the Saints always pick lines, Saints always pick lines, and then you see big worries at other skill positions. They go back to the lines. They like to beat the lines. And to be quite honest with you, good teams are built at the line, but you just have to hit on those picks. And 2 years ago, you didn't really hit on the pick yet with Davenport, and that's what worries you. Like, for me, like, it's not that they went defensive end or defensive line, because I do think that needs to be, definitely worked out, and I think they have to add guys, to that area. But I mean, I feel like when you have a guy like JOK on the board, you have other guys on the board, you have wide receivers, a lot of wide receivers on the board, with Elijah Moore, Rondell Moore. It's a little interesting to say the least. But again, I feel like when looking at Turner, you see kind of a lot of the stuff there. You see the athleticism. You see why the Saints wanted him. He's a very Saints defensive end. He is big. He is athletic. He's got all the intangibles to become a great edge rusher, run and pass, both sides, rushing the passer and stopping the run. And now it's just like, is he going to do it? And we went over his strengths. Now it's kind of the weaknesses. And it's really just all technique stuff. It's like, it's the base. It's like sometimes his center of gravity is very, very high because he's 6'5", 270. His power rush can stall a little bit. His hand technique isn't the best. He does have a knee and foot injury in the background of his career as well. Just like counter rushes, like trying to make counter moves, not the best at that either. He's just, to me, a pretty raw player. And that doesn't mean that can't change. I think it will change. Like, this is the stuff you can develop. But, you see a guy like Davenport who really hasn't developed it yet. That scares you. But they're two different players. That's why I think it's unfair to kind of, compare these two guys with Turner and then also Davenport. But to me, they are very similar, very, large athletic players that can really work in the 4-3. I mean, I know NFL.com comps him to Preston Smith, but to me, it's really similar. And, he's got the bend, though. He's got the agility. It's just going to be really interesting. His footwork, technique, center of gravity, that's the stuff he's going to have to work on. That's why I have Ryan Nielsen, who's probably one of the best defensive line coaches in all the NFL. And honestly, I think that's all what you can, now hope for this pick. Can Ryan Nielsen and the Saints coaching staff take all of these such plus characteristics, athletic, whatever it be, size, physical, can they now mold him into a great defensive end? And they tried that, in 2018 with Davenport. Injuries derailed it so far. We'll see how that works out. Can they do it with Turner? And that's going to be the biggest question here now heading into this 2021 season. But now we're going to have to look ahead quickly to round 2 and 3, day 2 tomorrow. And really just quickly what I want to talk about is the Saints team. They need a cornerback and they need a linebacker. They have 3 picks tomorrow. 2 out of those 3 should be a cornerback and a linebacker. And if it's not that, the Saints are going to have to sign a free agent, whether that's Richard Sherman or Quan Alexander, whoever it may be. But, it's going to be very interesting to see how that all works out. But, Payton Turner, he's a guy that had 5 sacks last season, 10.5 tackles for loss. That led the team for Houston in 2020. He's a guy that, to me, is just a prototypical Saints defensive end. I think he would have went 40s probably, to me, 40s or 50s. Probably 40s, I'd say. He was 42 ranked on Daniel Jeremiah's board. So I'd say around the 40s. The Saints pick him at 28 because they wouldn't have had the chance to pick him in the second round unless they moved up, which would have been very hard. And I bet because they had 2 corners go off and, really to the Saints, probably their top 2, guys that, were realistic for them, which was Newsome and Farley. And they both went within 5 picks. Then what do the Saints always do? They pivot to linemen. Every year they do it. And, when just going back, you go back to Ruiz, then you go back to McCoy, then you go to Davenport, then you go to Ramczyk, then you go even beyond that to Pete, to Rankins. The Saints draft linemen, and they've been very successful at it. That's why I don't want to knock this pick too much, because I would have probably went with JOK if it was up to me, or I would have went to a skill position player, either on offense or defense. But the Saints have had success. I mean, they have had some success here. They got an All-Pro in Ramczyk. You got Eric McCoy, who's a really solid offensive lineman. Davenport still yet to be seen. Rankins didn't work out too much. Andrews Pete's on a second contract. Now everyone likes to rag on him, but he is on a second contract. And look, if he's a top 10 guard, that's obviously a hit, for the Saints. And then you even go beyond that. I really do think that when looking at the Saints team, they go line and they've hit on a good amount of them, and they've been big parts of this team, especially O-line, D-line. I feel like when you look at the last 2, haven't hit as much, but we're gonna try to change that with Turner right here. So definitely really, really interesting. We'll be back for day 2 to recap all of the day 2 picks, but for now, I think this will wrap up this episode of the Who Dat discussion. If you like what we're doing here, definitely follow us on Twitter, Instagram, definitely listen on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, all that fun stuff. And, it's going to be very interesting going forward. But Payton Turner is the newest member of the New Orleans Saints. Welcome to the Big Easy. Payton should definitely be really fun. And I can't wait to see this defensive line because it better be stacked. It better be a top 5 line getting after quarterbacks. And it should be a line that, to me, especially those edge rushers, quarterbacks should be scared of. But I think with all that said, I want to say thank you guys for watching and listening. Turn it loose and who dat?